I'm Matthew Moniz, and this is the Huawei Mate 9, a 5.9-inch device aimed at those who are looking for a bigger smartphone. Now, I have to admit, Huawei couldn't have released this at a better time because the Galaxy Note 7, also a big smartphone, also a very popular one, is no longer a thing on the market. Now, for those of you out there looking for a big phone, you might want to consider the Mate 9 because it does hit a lot of the check marks. I also want to preface this video by saying right now we're running pre-build versions of the software. So it's going to get a final update before it gets released, which will be in the next couple of weeks. I also promise to revisit this phone sometime in the future to update this video that I'm doing right now. So is the Huawei Mate 9 worth it? Let's find out. The design is nothing new or fancy, but it does hit all the right checkboxes for a premium smartphone. It's a metal slab with a slightly curved back, and the sides have this nice glossy finish. Now that glossy finish is the same finish that's on the P9 Plus, so you might be familiar with it. It makes the phone look very classy, but also allows it to be gripped much easier. So a lot of you are probably thinking, 5.9 inches, this is way too big to hold with one hand or use on a daily basis. But to be quite honest, they did such a good job of reducing the bezel size that if you held an iPhone 7 Plus, it's pretty much the same size as the Huawei Mate 9. So for example, it's pretty much the same thickness. It's actually shorter than the 7 Plus, but the 7 Plus is a little bit more narrow. Now to put this in comparison, the Nexus 6P is a 5.7-inch smartphone, and I found it to be a lot more uncomfortable to hold because the sides were a lot thicker and more squared off. The buttons are clicky and tactile, there's an audio jack, and Huawei has included an infrared sensor at the top so you can control your appliances such as your TV. Overall, this is a very well-made smartphone, but it also happens to be Daydream ready. I actually tried it out with my Daydream View here in the studio, but the phone itself is still listed as an incompatible device. So I think Google still has to do something on their end to update their software to recognize the Mate 9. There's two speaker grills on the bottom, but only the right one plays music. The other speaker is actually shared with the earpiece. So it has the same setup as the Huawei P9 Plus or HTC 10. In terms of sound quality, they're not bad. It's better than most mono speakers. I actually compared it to the P9 Plus and found the P9 Plus to have better lows while the Mate 9 had nicer highs. The Mate 9 also comes with 64 gigabytes of internal storage, but you can add more by using a micro SD card. As I mentioned earlier, the Mate 9 comes with a 5.9-inch display. It's an IPS panel and it's 1080p. Now some of you are probably like, why would they do such a thing? Why would they put a 1080p display on such a big phone? It's not going to look good. Honestly, it's actually a really nice display. The colors are vibrant, the whites are nice, and it gets fairly bright, making it easy to see when you're outdoors. Of course, if you look closely, especially at text on a white background, you can see some pixelation, but overall, it's not a deal breaker. Now don't get me wrong, I think it would have been a fantastic opportunity if Huawei stuck an AMOLED panel in here. Just imagine how gorgeous those vibrant colors would look along with those true blacks. Now of course you could pick up the Porsche version of this phone which does have an AMOLED panel, but you are going to lose some screen size as you're only going to get a 5.5-inch display. Let's talk performance, and inside the Mate 9 is their brand new Kirin 960 CPU. This is the first phone to have this chip inside of it. Now I usually don't like to show benchmarks, but I am going to show it this time because I want to make a point of how fast their new CPU really is compared to the competition. So as you can see, based on the Geekbench scores, it has the fastest multi-core performance, beating out even the iPhone 7 Plus. Now, of course, the iPhone 7 Plus still has that fast single-core performance, which is very important for certain situations. The Snapdragon 821 is slower, the Exynos 8890 is slower. It's just a very fast chipset. You have to remember, this is an 8-core chipset, and 4 of those cores are running at 2.4 gigahertz, and the other 4 are running at 1.8, so it's already a lot faster than the Snapdragon 821. On top of that, it's using the brand new Mali G71 GPU, which is a very powerful GPU, and probably the same GPU that the Galaxy S8 is going to get when it comes out in the near future. On top of this, Huawei is also introducing their own machine learning algorithm that studies the habits that you perform on your phone and optimizes the applications that you use most often. Also, Huawei is introducing a brand new file system so that your phone runs and performs better after 18 months of use. Now, quite frankly, I don't think I'm going to be using the phone for 18 months, but I really do hope someone out there does who can kind of review this 18 months down the road to let us know if it started lagging or if it's still just as fast the day they got it. With that being said, hardware performance is only half the story. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this video, this is running a pre-build version of the software. So the final release will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, and I'm quite confident the phone will run much better than it does now. Not to say it's running bad, it's pretty fluid, but there is the odd micro lag, and there's a few bugs, like for example, when Gmail notifications come in, the text ends up being white and you can't really read it. The Mate 9 is running Android 7.0, and on top of it is Huawei's brand new EMUI 5.0. Now, I'll be the first one to admit, I've never been a fan of EMUI, but 5.0 is a step in the right direction. For one, the UI is now a lot cleaner, and Huawei has chosen a white and blue color scheme. EMUI 5.0 was designed to match the atmosphere of the Greek islands. A lot of the same features from previous versions are still there, or some might find them gimmicky, but some of them are actually useful, like knocking the screen twice with your knuckles to take a screenshot. But then there's the other ones, like knocking twice, then drawing a letter to open up an app. It just feels like a really bad game of Street Fighter. The one small thing that I really like, especially on a big phone, is the ability to use one-handed mode. Being able to just simply swipe to the right or left to shrink the display is fantastic. Now, I know other Android manufacturers have similar features, but the execution is not as pretty or as fluid. The Mate 9 comes with a dual SIM slot, which is not popular here in North America, but popular in Asia, and people can use 2 SIM cards at the same time. For example, one for work and one perhaps for personal use. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because Huawei has included a software feature called App Twins that will allow you to install 2 of the same applications. So for example, if you have 2 WhatsApp accounts, you can have 2 versions of the same app installed at the same time, and then assign one of those SIMs to each application. Oh, and finally, there's an app drawer. You can go into your settings and enable or disable it depending on what you prefer. But of course, the software experience is not perfect. There's still a lot of duplicative apps. There's still a lot of Huawei's own personal apps, and I just think it just adds a lot of confusion for brand new users coming to the smartphone. But overall, I think EMUI 5.0 is a step in the right direction. For those of you who've used the P9, then you'll be very familiar with the camera on the Mate 9. It's the same concept, one 12 megapixel RGB sensor with an aperture of 2.2, and the other a monochrome one. The big difference this time is that the monochrome sensor has been bumped up from 12 megapixels to 20. This means you're going to get a lot more detail in your images. Now, I did put this up against the iPhone 7 Plus, and it did do a better job in some areas. For example, the Mate 9 captures more detail in longer distances, but doesn't do as well as the 7 Plus up close. I found the 7 Plus to do a much better job with the shadows, whereas the Mate 9 overexposed them a little too much. Now, this is not a bad thing, it's just more of how you prefer the look of your images. Also, based on my testing, the iPhone 7 Plus showed more dynamic range and brought the picture closer to reality, where the Mate 9 I found to look a little flat and sometimes present a yellowish hue. The iPhone 7 Plus has a depth effect, and the Mate 9 has its own called wide aperture. This basically lets you take photos with a blurred background effect. I found it easier to set up a shot on the Mate 9, but again, the 7 Plus showed more dynamic range and overall a better photo. Low light wasn't that great compared to the top phones either. The Pixel did a much better job nailing the shot, where the Mate 9 tended to bump up the ISO too much and present a lot of noise. However, on a positive note, there's now optical image stabilization, something missing from the P9. The video stabilizes well and provides a smoother experience. The video during the day looks great, but suffers from the same experience I had with taking photos during low light. I truly feel a software update can turn this camera from a good camera to a great one. And last up is the battery life. Inside is a 4000 milliamp battery, and you would think with a 1080p display, you'd get 2 to 3 days of use before needing a charge. My results were a little bit less. I was getting about a day to a day and a half of use before needing to plug in. So usually I'd end the day with about 35 to 40% battery life left, which is still really good, but not as good as I think it should be with such a big battery. Now, of course, there's no wireless charging, and that's expected since it's a metal phone, but it does come with Huawei's Supercharge. So the phone will charge faster than Samsung's Fast Charge and Qualcomm's Quick Charge, all while keeping the phone much cooler. So here are my closing thoughts. The Huawei Mate 9 pretty much nails all the checkboxes I want in a smartphone. A beautiful design, good battery life, a beautiful display, and of course, a good software experience. EMUI is finally moving in the right direction, and I think a lot of people that felt frustrated by it before will be happy with it right now. And I also do think once it gets that final version before it gets released, the overall experience is going to get a lot better. The only area that I found to be a little bit of a letdown was the camera. For this price point, I feel the camera on the Mate 9 should be competing directly with the iPhone 7 Plus, the S7 Edge, and of course the Pixel. I'm not saying it's a bad camera, I just don't think it's one of the greater ones that are currently out on the market. Of course, again, maybe this can all be corrected by a software update, which is coming out in the next few weeks, so we'll just have to wait and see. The Mate 9 is making its way onto the market in Europe and Asia first for about 699 euros, and then it's coming to the United States probably, my guess, is in the beginning of 2017. So that wraps up my review of the Huawei Mate 9. Let me know what you think of this phone in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, subscribe, and as always, I will see you in the next video.